Dawn crept over Partel, France, painting the horizon in pale gray light. Inside Observation Post 4, a crumpled morning report lay forgotten on the desk as German technical officers of Flak Regiment 155W struggled to make sense of the impossible figures before them. It was late August 1944, 0615 hours, and the numbers defied every ballistic principle taught in Luftwaffe academies across the Reich. 82% destroyed. It couldn't be right. Through their field telescopes, the observers had witnessed something that shattered every assurance their intelligence officers had given them. V-1 flying bombs, launched toward London in the dim hours before dawn, were being cut from the sky at rates that made no logical sense. Not by daring fighter pilots twisting through pursuit curves. Not by entanglement in barrage balloon cables. But by anti-aircraft fire. Accurate, surgical, devastating. Shells detonating impossibly close to the targets, bursting around them in midair, as if guided by unseen hands. At the headquarters of Flak Regiment 155W in Chateau d'Edo, Oberst Max Wachtel, commander of the entire V-1 offensive, received these reports with growing unease. Over the course of the campaign, the proportion of flying bombs destroyed by Britain's coastal gun belt had soared, from 17% in June to 74% by late August, culminating in a staggering 82% destruction rate during one remarkable day that final week. It marked the dawn of one of the greatest technological shocks German weapons scientists would ever face. What neither Wachtel nor any scientist in the Reich realized was that they were witnessing the arrival of one of World War II's most closely guarded secrets, a technology shielded with the same level of secrecy as the atomic bomb. The proximity fuse, or VT fuse as the Allies coded it. It was methodically annihilating Hitler's vengeance weapon with a precision that German physics claimed was impossible. The story of that secret began 10 weeks earlier, June 13, 1944, exactly 7 days after D-Day. In response to the Allied invasion of Normandy, Hitler unleashed his long-promised Vergeltungswaffe, his vengeance weapon, against London. At 4:25 a.m., the first V-1 slammed into Grove Road in Bow, destroying a railway bridge and nearby homes. 6 people were killed, 30 wounded, and 200 left homeless. The weapon was the result of years of German engineering, a pilotless aircraft powered by an Argus as 109-014 pulsejet engine, carrying 850 kilograms of Amitol explosive at nearly 640 kilometers per hour. It was the world's first operational cruise missile. German High Command believed it would break Britain's resolve. Major Walter Dornberger, head of the V-weapons program at Peenemünde, calculated that even with only a 25% success rate, the V-1 would deliver more explosives on London than the entire Blitz of 1940-41. Each missile cost about 5,000 Reichsmarks. Far cheaper than a bomber sortie and with no risk to pilots. At Peenemünde Army Research Center, confidence ran high. German scientists had already built advanced rockets and jet aircraft. Now they had fielded a functioning cruise missile. Dr. Robert Lusser, the V-1's control system designer, calculated that interception by Allied defenses was practically impossible. Traveling at 640 kilometers per hour and cruising between 600 and 2,700 meters, the flying bomb gave British fighters almost no time to react. To shoot one down, a pilot had to close within 200 meters, close enough to risk destruction from its explosion. As for anti-aircraft fire, the math was merciless. The odds of a direct hit on such a small, fast-moving target were less than 1 in 10,000 rounds fired. It wasn't propaganda. It was hard, proven ballistic science. Conventional time-fused shells demanded perfect timing, flawless calculation, and manual adjustment, all within seconds. Against the V-1's speed, gunners had perhaps 30 seconds from detection to engagement. Oberst Max Wachtel, who commanded Flak Regiment 155W, understood these limits better than anyone. During the campaign, Germany launched 9,521 V-1s from ground sites against England and thousands more toward other targets, totaling around 25,000 missiles across the war. But within days of the first launches, troubling signs appeared. German intelligence began receiving reports that British anti-aircraft defenses were improving at an unnatural pace. By late June, interception rates had jumped from 10% to 24%. Higher than expected, but still within reason. Then came July and everything stopped making sense. German analysts tracking weapon effectiveness noticed British guns claiming more kills while firing dramatically fewer shells. Observers along the French coast saw V-1s heading steadily toward England, suddenly surrounded by perfectly placed flak bursts, then tumbling from the sky, destroyed by explosions that hadn't even touched them. Unbeknownst to German intelligence, they were witnessing the dawn of a new age of warfare. Proximity fuses that turned near misses into certain kills. The technology had already proven itself in the Pacific by January 1943, when the USS Helena shot down a Japanese dive bomber using shells that detonated automatically upon nearing their target. Germany's intelligence failure regarding this weapon was absolute. The Oslo report of November 1939 had mentioned research into a proximity fuse, yet German scientists dismissed it as deliberate Allied disinformation. In truth, the Reich had pursued similar concepts. More than 30 different designs were tested, but none ever reached operational success. German engineers ultimately concluded the idea was impossible. The obstacles were immense. Miniaturizing radio transmitters and receivers small enough for artillery shells, creating vacuum tubes that could withstand 20,000 gs of acceleration, developing batteries capable of activating after years in storage, and scaling such a design for mass production. But by August 1944, American factories were rolling out 40,000 proximity fuses every single day. During the final week of that same August, the weapon reached peak effectiveness. The British had completely reorganized their air defense network. Anti-aircraft guns were now guided by American SCR 584 radar systems capable of fully automatic tracking. More importantly, the guns were firing shells armed with VT fuses, modified specifically to counter the V-1 threat. The Royal Artillery and RAF Regiment had shifted from positions along the North Downs to the southern coast, forming a dense overlapping wall of fire. This coastal deployment meant that any unexploded shells would fall harmlessly into the sea, preventing the Germans from recovering and studying them. As the V-1s crossed into English airspace, they entered a lethal zone where technology had finally overtaken probability. The SCR 584 radar locked automatically onto each flying bomb, computed trajectories, and transmitted firing data directly to the gun batteries. Inside each shell, the proximity fuse carried a miniature radio transmitter, built using vacuum tubes designed by Sylvania Electric and Western Electric. When the reflected signal indicated the target was near, tiny thyrotron switches triggered the detonator, hurling steel fragments through the V-1's thin hull. On one late August day, British coastal guns achieved an astonishing 82% kill rate, numbers that German scientists insisted were physically impossible. Reports of these figures triggered crisis meetings at German headquarters. Wachtel suspected sabotage, but emergency inspections found nothing wrong with the missiles. Test firings over German territory performed flawlessly. The failures occurred only when facing British defenses. German analysts concluded that Britain had developed a revolutionary new anti-aircraft system, but without captured examples, its nature remained a mystery. They experimented with every countermeasure imaginable: higher altitudes, larger salvos, night attacks, bad weather launches. Nothing worked. The destruction rate stayed catastrophic. At Peenemünde, German scientists finally faced a grim realization. If the Allies truly possessed proximity fuses, then they had achieved what Germany's best minds had declared impossible. Efforts to uncover the secret intensified but achieved nothing. Security around the proximity fuse program was airtight. Production was spread across 110 separate factories, each worker knowing only a single component of the process. Even the name variable time fuse was a deliberate deception, implying a conventional timed detonator rather than a proximity-based sensor. By 1944, much of America's electronics industry had been redirected to produce these fuses. By the war's end, over 22 million proximity fuses had been manufactured. at a cost exceeding $1 billion in 1940s money. The Crosley Corporation alone produced more than 5 million units, nearly a quarter of total Allied output. The numbers told the story of an overwhelming industrial divide. While Germany struggled to assemble V-1s using forced labor, the United States transformed its civilian electronics industry into a precision weapons production network. At peak, daily fuse production hit 40,000 units. Costs plummeted from $732 per fuse in 1942 to just $18 by 1945. Crosley, once a maker of radios and refrigerators, now employed 10,000 workers turning out 16,000 fuses a day. Sylvania Electric redirected its entire vacuum tube division toward developing ruggedized components, producing 400,000 miniature tubes daily, supplying 95% of the total used in fuses. The contrast was total. Germany hand-built complex weapons in small numbers. America mass-produced revolutionary electronics at unprecedented scale. In a single month, Allied fuse production exceeded Germany's entire V-1 output for the war. The proximity fuse stood as an engineering marvel, a device that had to survive being fired from a gun, enduring 20,000 gs of force, spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute, and withstanding scorching and freezing extremes. Sylvania's engineers adapted hearing aid tube designs, reinforcing them to survive these stresses. Batteries remained inert for years, yet came alive the instant a shell was fired. Inside, a tiny radio transmitter pulsed continuously, measuring distance through reflected signals. When those echoes grew strongest, when death itself was near, the circuits closed and detonation followed. This seemingly straightforward idea demanded solving engineering problems that German scientists had long dismissed as impossible. Quality control reached levels no military production line had ever achieved. Each fuse endured multiple inspections and precision tests. Random batches were even fired from test guns to confirm reliability. With rejection rates under 2%, it stood as one of the most precise mass production efforts in history. By September 1944, the V-1 offensive was effectively crushed. Out of 9,521 V-1s launched toward Britain, only 2,515 reached London, killing 6,184 civilians and injuring 17,981. Tragic numbers, yet a mere fraction of the devastation Germany had intended. General Frederick Pyle, commander of Britain's anti-aircraft command, later calculated that without proximity fuses, the death toll would have been 4 to 5 times higher. In truth, the proximity fuse had saved London from annihilation. Desperate, Germany switched to night operations and introduced the V-2 rocket. Too fast for interception, but even that failed to alter the strategic balance. The V-1 campaign had become an enormous failure, consuming resources the Reich could no longer spare. The German inability to detect the proximity fuse remains one of history's greatest intelligence failures. Despite their vast espionage network and technical expertise, the truth slipped entirely past them. Not a single intact fuse was recovered during the entire V-1 campaign. Even during the Battle of the Bulge, when German troops captured an American ammunition depot containing proximity-fused shells, they failed to recognize what they had found. Their conviction that such technology was impossible blinded them to the evidence in their own hands. After Germany's surrender, interrogations revealed just how complete that ignorance had been. Oberst Max Wachtel, who oversaw the V-1 campaign, told Allied officers that his staff suspected faster timers or radar-assisted aiming. But the idea of a shell that could think for itself never crossed their minds. When German scientists were finally shown captured American VT fuses, disbelief was universal. They couldn't understand how the delicate vacuum tubes had survived the immense acceleration, how the batteries could remain functional for years, or how the circuits endured the shock of gunfire. They estimated they were a full decade behind American technology. Dr. Merle Tuve, who led the program at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, later reflected that the key to success was collaboration. Scientists, engineers, and factory workers all working seamlessly together, something a totalitarian system could never replicate. The proximity fuse proved that the outcome of World War II was decided as much in the laboratory and factory as on the battlefield. While Germany gambled on exotic wonder weapons, America invested in technologies that multiplied the power of what it already had. The proximity fuse made every anti-aircraft gun 5 to 10 times more lethal. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal declared, "The proximity fuse has blazed the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device has given our fleets, our advance westward could not have been so swift, and the price in lives and ships would have been immeasurably greater." The contrast between the two systems could not have been more striking. The V-1 program relied on slave labor. Tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners dying in underground factories beneath the Harz Mountains. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American workers, many of them women, volunteered for exhausting 12-hour shifts, motivated not by fear but by purpose. At Sylvania's Ipswich facility alone, over 5,000 women worked tirelessly assembling specialized components, unaware of what their hands were building. Only after the war did they learn that their labor had helped save London from destruction. Secrecy was absolute. Even the British anti-aircraft crews using the new ammunition had no idea what made it so effective. Each proximity-fused shell was meticulously accounted for. Unexploded rounds were immediately recovered, and naval patrols guarded the channel to prevent German salvage. That secrecy came at a cost. Allied ground troops were forbidden from using proximity-fused shells until December 1944. Thousands of soldiers died in Europe before the fuse could be unleashed in ground combat. Yet the decision was necessary. Protecting London during the invasion months was paramount. For Germany, the V-1 program became a monument to wasted effort. Tens of thousands of rockets launched at staggering cost, draining resources from fighter aircraft and anti-tank weapons desperately needed on collapsing fronts. The reliance on slave labor added a grim moral dimension. The proximity fuse was destroying weapons built through human suffering. In the end, the proximity fuse symbolized the true nature of modern warfare: victory through engineering, coordination, and production rather than isolated brilliance. It proved that modern wars were battles of entire industrial systems. Before it shielded the Pacific Fleet and helped defeat Japan, it had already saved London. German officers watching their V-1s fall from the sky never understood why. The weapon that defeated them existed outside their scientific imagination. The transformation was staggering. Before the fuse, destroying a single V-1 required roughly 2,500 heavy shells. With the proximity fuse, that number dropped to just 100. A leap not only in technology but in the very mathematics of war. The interception rate of the gun belts soared from just 17% to an astonishing 82% within 10 weeks. This incredible leap wasn't the result of heroism or superior training. It was born from the mass production of cutting-edge technology on a scale Germany could neither rival nor fully understand. The United States had mobilized its entire electronics industry, employing over 80,000 workers and investing more than $1 billion to manufacture an unbelievable 22 million fuses. When the proximity fuse was finally declassified in September 1945, the War Department described it as one of the most important weapons developed during the war, surpassed in effectiveness only by the atomic bomb. For German scientists who had long puzzled over the mysterious failures of their V-1 campaign, that revelation was a mix of enlightenment and humiliation. They hadn't been defeated by superior tactics or bravery, but by an industrial power they could scarcely imagine. Post-war interrogations exposed their shock. They had believed the V-1 represented the height of weapons technology, only to discover it had been undone by mass-produced electronics costing less than $20 apiece. They had lost not to soldiers, but to assembly lines. That same proximity fuse technology would later evolve into the foundation for modern air defense systems, radar altimeters, and electronic warfare. For Germany's once proud weapons designers, it remained an enduring reminder of their wartime blindness. The proximity fuse proved a fundamental truth of modern conflict. Producing good technology by the millions can outweigh crafting perfect weapons in handfuls. Germany created masterpieces of engineering. America built effectiveness by the ton. And on that remarkable day in late August 1944, when proximity fuses destroyed 82% of Germany's V-1s, the very nature of warfare changed forever. The Germans launching their vengeance weapons had no idea what invisible power was striking them down. They had done everything right by their standards, developed sophisticated designs, trained elite crews, achieved impressive innovations. Yet they were undone by a swarm of cheap, dependable circuits they couldn't even imagine. The proximity fuse saved London one small explosion at a time, each guided by technology German scientists had dismissed as impossible. It was the triumph of industrial democracy over totalitarian precision, of mass production over handcrafted brilliance, of practical simplicity over intricate wonder weapons. The Germans never understood what was striking their V-1 rockets from the sky, brought down not by luck, but by an invisible secret and an industrial power they could never rival. Hitler's so-called vengeance weapon had become London's unexpected shield, and the truth behind that miracle stayed hidden, even from its own creators, long after it no longer mattered. In the end, America's greatest triumph wasn't fought in the trenches or skies, but on the factory floor. Millions of ordinary men and women, many unaware of what they were building, assembled the tiny electronic marvels that saved a city and forever changed the face of war. That remarkable 82% interception rate in August 1944 wasn't just a statistic. It was proof that in the new age of warfare, science and mass production could outmatch any so-called wonder weapon. The proximity fuse became more than just a tool of destruction. It was a symbol of what free minds and united effort could achieve. For the Germans watching their prized V-1s fall in flames, the lesson was devastating but clear. While their leaders still dreamed of victory, the war had already been lost to innovation, industry, and the unstoppable force of human ingenuity. If this story amazed you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful and untold stories from World War II.